The X-Files Season 5 Review. The X-Files Season 5 ran from late 1997 to mid-1998. It consisted of 20 episodes and starred David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, again in their iconic roles as Special Agents Fox Mulder and Dana Scully. The season begins with a two-parter, Redux, following on from the Season 4 cliffhanger. This two-parter is a bit of a... Part 2 is better than Part 1, which seems to consist largely of exposition, and it does more or less provide a reasonably satisfactory conclusion to the Scully cancer arc. However, it's just... Otherwise, it's largely rendered entirely pointless by the fact that we know that what's going on is complete bollocks. Cigarette smoking man gets killed, except there's no body, so we know he's not dead. And most importantly, the aliens aren't real plot is just... It's nonsense. It's too late in the day to pull this ripcord already. The audience has seen too much to buy this. More to the point, Mulder has seen too much to buy this, so him falling for it makes him look like a bit of an idiot. It's just... like I said, Part 2 is better than Part 1, and there's a bit of drama and excitement, except it all seems... most of it seems largely fake, except for the Scully stuff. We know the aliens are real. We know Mulder is being conned. We know Cancer Man is not dead. And the guy that turns out to be the traitor, we know Skinner's not going to be the traitor. And the guy that turns out to be the traitor, it's a nice touch to have it be the guy from the pilot episode. But we've never seen the fuck-up since that episode, up until these episodes. So it basically just comes across, again, a bit of false drama. The traitor turns out to be someone we barely met. Yeah, it's a bit of a weak opener, to be honest. Fortunately, things pick up straight away with the next episode, Unusual Suspects. A terrific little comedy thriller flashback episode which shows how the lone gunmen came together, and even has a bit of a tongue-in-cheek origin story for Mulder himself. This is a great little episode. It's a lovely mix of conspiracy thriller that just kind of edges towards being tongue-in-cheek, which perfectly suits the lone gunman's characters. It's Vince Gilligan, which usually means it's going to be a classic, and it's pretty close. The next episode is Detour, which is basically a sort of a standard Monster on the Week episode. On paper, this episode doesn't really look or sound like anything particularly special. Mulder and Scully are stranded in the woods with some kind of monster. It's all a bit, we've seen this before 1,000 times, and yet Detour is actually a really good episode. This is how to do a completely unimportant Monster of the Week episode, because it's done with such charm and such wit and such warmth, with some genuine scares thrown in, that it's almost something of a minor classic itself. Even though, like I said, on paper the story is nothing to write home about, but it's just really, really well done and really, really fun as a result. The next episode is the Postmodern Prometheus, the black and white episode. Now, I think this is something of a fan favourite. I don't like it, I have to be honest. A bit like Season 3's Syzygy, this feels like Chris Carter desperately trying to emulate Darren Morgan and not quite getting why Darren Morgan was so good at what he did. This just feels really... It's not very funny if it's supposed to be a comedy episode, and it all just feels a bit self-indulgent and weird and unnecessary. I'm sure that's an unpopular opinion. I mean, I'm not particularly au fait with X-Files fandom, but I do get the impression this is a fan favourite. I'm not a fan. Next up, we have a two-parter, A Christmas Carol and Emily, though it's not really clear until very close to the end of Part 1 that this is going to be a two-parter and precisely what is going on. Because the first episode is kind of a Christmassy episode with a bit of a mystery for Scully that doesn't seem to be terribly important. And then it turns out to basically be a conspiracy story, which leads into the second part. I have to say, I'm not a big fan of this arc. I do think the first episode is way stronger than the second, which is almost the flip side of Redux. I think Christmas Carol is a pretty decent kind of Christmassy themed episode with a nice atmosphere and a nice mystery. It's just the cul-de-sac it kind of goes down to, in the second part. It's just the same old conspiracy shenanigans, and it's not really that interesting, in my opinion. Episode 8 is Kitsune no Gari, which is a sequel to Pusher, and sees Robert Modell, who was apparently in a coma and never likely to get out of it at the end of Pusher. He's out of it, and in fact he breaks out of prison. But not everything is precisely as it seems. This is a really good episode. Probably not quite up there with the original Pusher, but it's a solid mystery with some great little scary moments. It's a lot of fun. The next episode is Schizogeny, which is basically just another standalone Monster of the Week episode. Some strange things are happening in this small town with teenagers who seem to be rebelling against their parents in a more extreme manner than normal for no apparent reason in some cases. This is an okay episode. There's some creepy moments. Ultimately, it just ends up being a little bit meh, though, I would argue. The next episode is Chinga, which is the much ballyhooed Stephen King co-written episode. This is a really fun episode. To say it's a Stephen King episode, it's not exactly original, but it is a lot of fun. Scully is on vacation, and she just can't get away from the X-Files even when she's on vacation, and finds herself involved with a case with a little girl with a doll that may be making people kill themselves. It's a really fun, creepy episode. Again, kind of like Detour, the story itself is not particularly original, but it's just done in such a fun, scary, and entertaining way. It's very difficult not to like it. The next episode is Kill Switch, which is also written by a famous author, in this case famous sci-fi writer William Gibson. This is a decent episode. The tech has not aged particularly well after, 25 years now? But it's an interesting enough story. I don't find it as much fun or as entertaining as Chinga, even though it probably is more original. But it's not bad. It's decent. The next episode is Bad Blood, which is a comedy episode as Mulder and Scully explore from their own wildly different viewpoints exactly what happened in a small town which seemingly ended with Mulder staking to death a supposedly normal teenage boy. I think this episode is perhaps a little bit overrated. I do like it. It is a very funny episode. I don't think it's quite up there with the best. Vince Gilligan, as with Small Potatoes, though, again shows that he's the only other writer other than Darren Morgan who can do comedy episodes. Just leave it to him, Chris, okay? Really. The next episode is a two-parter. It's Patient X and the Red and the Black. This is a big conspiracy two-parter where we get more stuff with the Scully's abductions. We get a new character introduced, played by Veronica Cartwright, and we get perhaps one of the first big twists in the big arc, in that we find out there is a rebel faction of the aliens that are basically working against the aliens and the conspirators to try and stop them from colonizing the Earth, seemingly. And it also starts to become clearer and clearer that the aliens that we know, the shape-shifting aliens that we know, they're basically infected with the black oil. That's why they're the bad guys. And these rebel factions have basically sewn their orifices shut in order to make sure they can't be infected by the black oil. This is an interesting enough two-parter. Its only major problem is, as always with the conspirators, that anything that can happen can be taken back by Chris Carter at a later date, which basically means that it ends up going nowhere. But it's entertaining enough on its own. The next episode is Travelers, which is a kind of a flashback episode about an X-Files case from the 1950s, which may involve Mulder's father. I know a lot of people seem to really like this. A lot of people really enjoy it. I'm not a fan. I find it really kind of boring. Oh, it's nice to kind of have a Darren McGavin cameo, Kolchak, of course, Kolchak being the show that inspired the X-Files. I'm not a big fan of this kind of episode in any TV show. It's one thing to have a flashback episode that's involving the lone gunmen, because they are important characters in the X-Files. Here we've basically got a flashback episode predominantly about characters who aren't really that important, and it just comes across as being a bit irrelevant to me. And because it's irrelevant, it's kind of a bit dull. It's like, what's the point in it, really? I'm not a big fan. The next episode is Mind's Eye, which is a really good little standalone story with a great guest star in Lily Taylor as a blind woman is implicated in murder. Mulder can't believe a word of this. He thinks there's something weird, much more strange going on than that. And he's right, because she's seemingly got some kind of connection to a serial killer where she's able to see through his eyes. This is a really strong episode. It kind of feels almost like a season 1 episode, which is a compliment, in my opinion. The next episode is All Souls, which is a supernatural religious one. I'm not big on this one. It's a bit dull and a bit silly. And did we really need to revisit the Emily arc? I don't think we did. No. The next episode is the Pine Bluff variant, which sees Mulder having been recruited for an undercover assignment to join a bunch of anti-government terrorists who are experimenting with a biological weapon. This is a pretty solid thriller episode. I'm not sure it's really an X-Files. There's nothing really X-Files about it apart from like the government conspiracy shenanigans, but even those shenanigans aren't really anything to do with the main conspiracy plot. But I can't complain too much because it's a solid episode. It's a solid, entertaining thriller episode, even if its status as an X-File is somewhat questionable. Episode 19, the penultimate episode of this season. This season's slightly shorter than most because of the fact that they were making the X-Files movie after it. Episode 19 is called Folie à Dieu, which sees Mulder getting involved with a delusional man who takes hostages at his workplace because he's convinced that his boss is some kind of giant insectoid monster who's turning his co-workers into mindless zombies. You just need Twitter for that nowadays. I love Folie à Dieu. I think Folie à Dieu is one of the best episodes of the season. Probably one of my all-time favorite episodes. It's just such a deliciously macabre mix with a touch of kind of comic book tongue-in-cheek to it, but still kind of really scary at times. This is a terrific episode. It's such an original idea, and it's really, really great fun. I love Folie à Dieu. It's one of the best stories of season 5, and an absolute classic. It's Vince Gilligan again, I think, isn't it? Yeah, I kind of think it is. Let me just check that. Yeah, Vince Gilligan yet again. Yeah, he was definitely one of the best writers on the X-Files at this point. And then you get to the season finale, which is The End, which sees Mulder and Scully getting involved when a child chess prodigy seemingly anticipates an assassination attempt seconds before it happens. And Mulder suspects that he can actually read minds. This is a solid season finale. It kind of leads into the movie. If there's a problem with it, again, it's a problem inherent to many of these conspiracy episodes, in that we've seen a lot of this before. A lot of stuff is talked up as being more important than it is. I mean, we see Gibson again, but the whole the whole thing of how important he is never really goes anywhere, so it's kind of pointless. That being said, it's a strong episode on its own terms. It's very watchable, and again, we get a kind of we're repeating things in that the X-Files gets shut down at the end. Well, we've done this before, dudes. We know it's going to get reopened. Unless you're ending the show, it's going to get reopened because the show's called the X-Files. But it's an okay. As a whole, I think season 5 is actually pretty strong. I think I actually prefer it to season 4. Let's put it this way: there's way more episodes that I tend to kind of skip in season 4, and there are some really strong episodes in here. Unusual Suspects, Detour, Christmas Carol, Kitsunugari, Chinga, Bad Blood, probably Mind's Eye, Pine Bluff Variant, even and especially for Foliage. This is a pretty solid season. It's probably not in my top 3, but I actually think it's somewhat underrated and just a really enjoyable watch. I give season 5 of the X-Files an A-.